My name is Aljamal Rashad Bynum. I'm the chair of the board of MORE, which stands for Movement Omaha for Race Equity. I'm glad you can join us this day. And as we would say, it's one of those things that hopefully we can help throw down some heavy light tonight, this afternoon in the United States and in the evening in Southern Africa. First thing I just want to start off, I'd like to thank our sponsoring organization, Nebraska Humanities, or Humanities Nebraska, who's been very much supportive of our programs, and the White Family Foundation. For those of you who don't know what MORE is, it's a group that deals with anti-racism, race equity issues. It's based in Omaha, Nebraska. And we're very much concerned with the issue of reconciliation, reparations, and conversations about race and diversity. I spent some time in Southern Africa, particularly Botswana. I had a chance to experience apartheid, which is very similar to what the apartheid behavior we had in this country. Some say we may still have it in some regards. But one of our goals is to get people to have conversations about that, to be very much involved in building international as well as national relationships dealing with race issues. The other thing I want to say is that this program will be recorded. And it would also be put on our webpage for people who like to view it afterwards. And more than anything, we want people to continue to engage in these interracial conversations and deal with some of those issues that relate to ethnicity, race, and so on, and those divisions that divide us. The other thing I just want to say, the format of today is that I will interview our guests for about 30 minutes, and then I would open it up to the participants to raise questions, comments. I do ask you to keep it briefly because the time can really get out of control and go fast. So we just want to be conscious of that. So let me just start off by saying, welcome Hatata Wing, and I know I mispronounced names. She goes by Oni. We talked a little bit briefly. She's wrote a book called Call and Response Stories, which is about stories and vignettes in Botswana, and a lot of those stories resonated with me, and I decided to bring her on to talk about this book and more about some of her experiences in writing the book and so on. She's been in many places, and she has her articles are played in many places, and she has a Master in Fine Arts and Creative Writing from the University of Mississippi. She has an extensive biography listed in the book. And also, we're excited that she's able to join us today for this international conversation on a wonderful book. And so, like I said, I have a series of questions I would ask her, let her respond, and go from there. So welcome again, Oni.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me to come on. I'm excited to talk to everybody about my book and about Botswana. So thank you for inviting me.
Good. I oftentimes provide brief introductions because my first question is first share with the participants a little bit more about yourself from your vantage point.
Yeah. So I was born in Sorowe in Botswana, which is in central Botswana, central district of Botswana. My family lives there, and I still consider it home. When I go home to Botswana, that's where I go. I go to Sorowe. I spent the first couple of years of my childhood in a small village in the northwest of Botswana called Makalamabedi, because my mom was a teacher and she taught there for a couple of years. And then at 13 years old, I moved to Gaborone to go to my secondary schooling, and then I stayed there for years during my university, and then I worked I worked as a journalist for a couple of years, and then eventually moved in 2014 was when I first came to the US for the first time to for my graduate studies, and I went to University of Mississippi. And I would say for the last 10 years, I've been sort of moving back and forth between Botswana and the US, just like going to different parts of the country. Actually, I lived in the Mississippi, and then I lived in California in the Bay Area, and then I lived last year. I not last year, yeah, last year. Yeah, last year I spent some time in Massachusetts, and now I'm living in Madison, Wisconsin. And it's all just like doing different fellowships, writing residencies, just to sort of give myself time and space to focus on my work. Yeah, so that's what I've been doing for the past couple of years.
Good, good. Let me get right into the questions because I know we have a number of questions we want to cover. As I read your book, Call and Response Stories, so one of the salient issues of point to remind me of my Peace Corps experiences, and you outline some of those changes in the book. What was most striking about the old customs and the new customs? Because I know you talk about both in your book.
Yeah, I think what I'm interested in really is how some of those old customs are able to sustain themselves through the different changes that we've been through as a country and as a society, which, you know, are changes that other places have been through, right? Like colonialism, you know, just like the changes that are brought by modernity, globalization. I think that Botswana has gone through like a lot of rapid changes since independence, really, since the discovery of diamonds. So we've gone through a lot of changes, and what I'm really interested in is like, how are some of these old customs? You know, what are the old customs that we've got rid of because of Christianity or whatever other major forces that have exerted pressure on our lives? What are those old customs, and like what are the how are the other customs able to sustain themselves? So actually, you know, one of the things that was interesting to me was the pandemic was really interesting to me because it was at a time when the government had to get involved, right, to sort of set rules and regulations, to say things like to set like a set number of people that could attend ceremonies like weddings or funerals or you know, like mahadi ceremonies or things like that, you know, like bride price paying ceremonies. It was really interesting to me to sort of hear. I was on social media at that time, and so I would often go on Twitter to just like hear what people were thinking about these sort of enforced regulations that were sort of changing the way that people would traditionally do certain things. So, you know, the idea of having 20 people or a set number of people attend a wedding or attend a funeral or attend like a traditional ceremony seems completely antithetical to the way that Botswana do things and the idea of like community and communalism that I think has been able to sort of sustain us through different changes. And so it was interesting to see how people were reacting to those sort of things. And you know, like some people were like, well, actually a small wedding is probably better than the big kind of village wedding because it's way less expensive. And you can only bring in people that you know, like people that are super close to you. So it was just sort of interesting to see how that was working in a real moment, like in the real world. So that's sort of the things that I'm interested in. Yeah, when I'm thinking about different customs and how they're changing.
You know, one of the things that come to mind is writers, especially novelists or book writers, they cite an impetus, I want to say impetus, a reason for writing a book. How long did it take you to write the book? And what were some of those defining moments that made you put pen to paper? Because a lot of us say we're going to write a book, we never get to it. But what was your defining moments? Was there something like that for you then? Impetus.
There was never anything like that for me. I think I always wanted to be a writer and I always wanted to write books. You know, like I said, I worked as a journalist for a couple of years, and I think it was a desire to do a job that would involve writing. And at some point, but I think, you know, like during the years that I was working as a journalist, I was also still writing fiction
Mm-hmm.
and, you know, writing fiction and sending it to publications and sending it to contests and things like that. And I think that at the time, it was during a time when a lot of young African writers were also publishing, especially here in the US. You know, writers like uh Violet Bulawayo, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. So it began to feel like, oh, this is like a possibility for me. And so that's when I started looking into MFA programs. And
Good.
so a lot of a lot of the stories in the book I wrote in my MFA program and in the years after my MFA, after I graduated from my MFA. So I would say it probably took me all in all about 7 years to write all the books in the all the stories in the book. So yeah, about 7 years.
Wow, wow. You know, I noticed that when I was reading the book, and those of us who have read the book, who are familiar with some of your terminology, I noticed you introduced a number of Setswana words, and my question is, why did you not include a glossary or definition for those who have not experienced the language of Setswana or been in Botswana? So, because some writers will put all that, but and contextually, I think you expect people to defer. But give me a little bit more background.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting question, and that's actually a very political question. That's a question that
Wait, hold on. You said political. What do you mean by that?
it's a very political, it's like a politically charged question.
Okay.
It's a question that goes to the question of audience, of who are you writing for and who are you writing towards, and like who are you writing these stories for? And I think that you know, before in the older days of publishing, people from, you know, writers from Africa, from other places, would be expected to provide a glossary for their work because the idea is that you're writing towards an American audience or towards audiences in the Western world. And now I think we're all just sort of like, no, I'm actually not writing for an American audience. I'm actually writing for a Botswana audience, and my book will be published by an American publisher, and they will sell it to American audiences. But the people that I'm trying to have a discussion with, that I'm trying to really write towards people in Botswana. And so but you know, like that's a question that really comes up for me a lot, the question of like how much to explain, how much to sort of leave I don't know, mysterious for other readers that are not Botswana or
Right.
that don't understand Setswana. And so it's just like a line that you have to sort of figure out for yourself. For me, I think that people can infer the meaning of some words, and I think that if they don't understand some words, it's fine. You know, like we grew up reading books by British writers and like American writers, and we didn't understand everything that was going on, but we just like read the book. Nobody
In other
gave me a
words, what's
glossary.
good for the goose is good for the gander. I
Yes,
understand. No,
exactly.
I'm with you. I'm tracking. Okay. I know that sometimes, again, we have multilingual folks and folks want to know what do you really mean, but also we have computers now and phones where we can look up
Yes.
translations and mean
Yeah.
the term you don't know. I'm going to switch up because we're chasing a little time. This is Women's History Month, and most of your characters I noticed in the book are females. One only needs to examine the lack of women in public policy and leadership positions in your book and how women are treated in many countries. Is there a purpose or teachable moment in that you're talking to males about challenges women face dealing with misogynistic behavior or patriarchal system? In other words, are you doing some teaching in this book? Help me a little bit with some of the roles of gender in Botswana and Southern Africa and Africa in general, and maybe even here, the United States. Help me with that your characters, and are you teaching us something?
I wasn't setting out to teach the men about the challenges that women face, but I was more that it's more that I'm interested in women's lives and in the totality of their lives and in their experiences, in the sort of struggles, the personal struggles that they go through, the systemic struggles that they go through, the way that their ambitions can be thwarted or constrained by tradition and culture. And just like, you know, like I think the intense interest and consideration of women's lives, what it results in, and the way that I'm attempting to approach it in a truthful manner, what it results in is like an account that shows the constraints and the challenges and the you know, sort of the discriminations or whatever that they face that you know, due to misogyny or a patriarchal culture. But it wasn't really like I'm gonna show how men mistreated. It was more like I'm interested in women, in this woman's life, and a truthful rendering of that woman's life then shows the way that, you know, we
I
have to
got
face
you. I'm
challenges.
tracking.
Yeah.
The other thing is also, again, those of us who are familiar with the country and have been in the country for a while, more than just a night over our
Yeah.
safari trips on people, there are many characters in your book. And I noticed that from reading your book, it's very revealing. Could your colleagues or your friends or acquaintances from reading your book tell if you're talking about them? I don't know if you're using actual people or you made up, but my question is, could somebody look at your book and say, she's talking about me?
You know what's really funny? I have a story in my book it's called Homing, and it's about three sisters who meet to decide about to talk about the mom and what to do about
Right.
that elderly mother. And I have two sisters, and we have an elderly mother. And so my sister called me when there was a preview of the book that sort of mentioned the summary of that story. And so one of my sisters called me and she was like, tell me what the story is about. Tell me exactly, tell me right now. Tell me what the story is saying. Just like, no, why didn't you wait? No, other than that, nobody has I don't think I'm not really using like I'm not I mean I have some characters that are based on people, but I changed them so much that you can't recognize yourself, I don't think. So no, I haven't had anybody say to me like, why are you writing about me or anything like that, like, other than that.
I like your operative word, you think. Okay, so somebody may see
I
themselves
think
because these are experiences that you had.
maybe some people might see themselves. I don't know. Nobody said anything to me.
I got you. Now, many African Americans and other Americans will never travel to Africa or particularly Southern Africa. How can we learn significantly from reading those novels and books? In other words, those of us who follow African literature, and you alluded to it earlier, for example, in Southern Africa, we follow Bessie Head, other African writers from that part. Alexander Call was very famous for some of his books. How do you contrast your style with their narratives in your book?
Bessie Head is one of the biggest influences for me as a writer. I think we are interested in this sort of similar themes, similar ideas. She also wrote about Sorowe. She lived in Sorowe too for a long time. And she is also interested, I think, in the lives of ordinary people, the lives of ordinary women living in the rural areas, and sort of writing about their lives, even if even if they're poor, writing about their lives in a way that her work sort of imbues their lives with beauty and dignity and love. I would say that in my work I really try as much as like she's an example for me to follow. Um yeah, Alexander McCall Smith, he's cool. I like his work.
Let's move on, as you would say. I noticed that in your book you cited ethnic differences: the Kalanga, the San, the Kosan, the Basaros, and so on, and some of the indigenous people in the country, and so on. Are there contentious issues with African groups of the tribe, or as we would say, some divisions that we know of in the country? Because I noticed you talk about each one of these different groups separately in your book.
I would say so. I think that, every culture, every society, there always, I just think that humans are obsessed with like hierarchical thinking,
Hmm.
with ideas of like who's dominant, who's not dominant, who's in the minority, and ways that they contrive to make them as different as possible to the other people that they consider the minority. And I think that those differences, those ideas of hierarchy exist today in Botswana in very insidious ways that we don't really talk about. So we do have like I don't know if like tribalism, if we are gonna call it that. I think it exists, and I think we just don't really talk about it. But like it shows up in ways that, for example, um, you know, um, I don't know what kids are learning in school today, but when I was younger, we were taught when I was taking like social studies, we were taught that there are 10 major tribes in Botswana. And so at home I would be told that I'm a Matala out there, right? And then in school I would be told actually Matala don't exist. What you are is like a Mongwatu because you're from Saroy, because Bangwatu are like part of the 10 major tribes. So it's just like those sort of ideas are still continuing today, but we don't really have any kind of discussions about them as a country. And so I'm really interested in sort of trying to bring that to um for make it part of the national discourse, I think.
As you alluded to that, one of the things I think countries have to do a much better job, and I would be emphatic about this, where you look at South Africa, the different nations or tribes, you look at Botswana, is that nations need to spend some time talking about differences. And again, as Mark Wheatley says, it's not the differences that matter, it's what we do about it. So how do you get us to have these conversations and be able to break bread or do what we need to do so that we
Yeah.
don't have the animosity and the conflicts that happens in other parts of the world because we've started to demonize people because of who they are. And so, very important concept. I'm going to switch up a little bit. In chapter 15, I'm going specifically to your book on this part of religion. I found that fascinating that you talked about witchcraft. Then you talk about Laraco. Then you talk about the grandmother, the uncle, and Kuku, I think it's the grandmother, uncle, obviously Maloney, who are devout Christians. And you go into that. And then you basically switch back and forth and talk about these things in the same kind of story. And my question is, how important is religion in the lives of many of those characters and maybe in Botswana? Because I found that fascinating how you switch between those three type of denominations or groups or worldviews, let's put it.
Yeah, I think that religion is really important to Botswana. Christianity in particular has become like the dominant religion. It has been. I think it has been for decades and decades now. But now it's just sort of becoming like more into like the intensity of Christian belief now is, I don't know, to me is really worrisome. It kind of feels like a cult. But like when I was it
Slip that in.
does.
I like that.
It does. It really does. Like the way that people now have sort of given up responsibility for their lives, and they're just like, is either God ordained it, or like there's a demon or something who's like causing your life to go awry, and people are just like not, like that sort of relinquishing responsibility for their lives to these sort of abstract ideas. I find it really interesting and really disturbing. But yeah, I mean, I think that for me, when I was growing up in my childhood, it was really common for people to be Christians, but also to, well, maybe it wasn't common. It wasn't common. It wasn't talked about, but I think it was understood that you can be Christian, but also, when it's required, when it's necessary, you could also still go to traditional doctors and seek help when, when like the Western ways have failed. Like if you are sick, you can go to a hospital. If the hospital failed, then you can go to a traditional doctor. Like you're all just gonna use both of these things. You're gonna use both of those things to sort of both of those modalities to sort of figure things out. And it happened similarly with religion. Like you could be a Christian and go to church, but you could also still practice some sort of traditional beliefs.
Just as you were mentioning this, I started talking about the concept of witchcraft. So, how does witchcraft fit into the traditional doctor? I think they're different, and Christianity. How does it? Because you use that as a character where
Oh
they
yeah.
actually
So
dealt with witchcraft too.
I use traditional doctor to mean like somebody who's like legitimate, not trying to be evil, not trying to like kill you. Somebody who's like actually giving you medication that can help you. Like if it's like herbs, it's like take this herb and drink it, and it's like something that could use help you because it's a plant, right?
Gotcha.
But I think that witchcraft is like has evil intentions behind it.
Okay, got you. Okay.
Like
Well,
somebody who's trying to destroy your life or or something.
okay.
I don't know.
I gave a lecture on religion in Africa, and someone was talking about the whole issue of Haiti and the issue of voodooism. And so someone said we have to also give credibility to that is practiced in certain parts of the world. And again, have a conversation whether you agree or not, but be knowledgeable that there are different ways that people approach life using those kind of spiritual or whatever beliefs they have. Switching up just again is one of the things I was going to ask you is that in I think one of your books or somewhere I saw somewhere, there's almost this thing like you may do another book. And I always like to ask an author, what's your next book? And do we get are you going to give us the rundown or give us the insight on what's coming up next? Do you have another proposal in mind or novel or anything like that?
I am working on a novel right now. Oh my God, I don't know what to say. I don't know if I have anything to say about it except that it will be set in Botswana again. It will be set mostly in Gaborone this time, and it's just about this one. It's going to be a novel, so it's going to be following a similar set of characters throughout some time. Um, and I don't know. It's just interested in relationships and love. That's it. Nothing crazy.
The reason I asked that is when I was traveling to different villages in Botswana and different places, and you would be places, people always had stories to tell and hope, the cultural different stories you'd hear. But one of the things I remember is that when you're sitting around the fire at night and you're kind of quiet, they'll say, Haki Bui, what are you saying? Or why are you quiet? And so your
Oh
whole
yeah.
existence, and this is before they had television when I was there. But it was just fascinating the conversationalists that people would come up to. And if you don't engage in the conversation or learn how to do medisa or greet
Oh
people,
yeah.
like, do you wish me well or bad or whatever? So there are things you learn when you're in the country, particularly if you're there for any length of time. But yeah, storytelling and so on is about how we relate to each other and so on. The other thing I was going to say to you, and I just want to kind of go back to an earlier point. You said it took you 7 years to write this book. Is that long or short or whatever? Why is it so long or short?
I think it just takes long to write short stories because it's not like one sustained narrative. It's just like um different stories, and so different stories like one story will require its own time, um and it'll take time. It'll take like 2 years or whatever to finish like a one story. um so it kind of feels like sort of the right amount of time to write a collection of short stories. I think novels actually take shorter than short stories. So yeah.
You know, as I was getting ready for this interview, I made some contacts and I found out there's a Botswana book club or club, a number of people who have book clubs in Botswana and again want to reach out to them. And one of the things we'd love to do is do more conversations about authors, indigenous authors from Southern Africa, Namibia, Zimbabwe, Swaziland, Lesotho, you name it. But just to talk about how do you bridge the cultural group and so on. So again, a shout out to the group out there. And also I've been familiar with the Botswana Historical Society. Again, those of us who follow history understand how important that is for our folks to understand where we come from, whether we from the continent or born in the United States as Africans. We need to know a little about our background and our ancestors and folks who've gotten this far. We're about halfway through it. I know we are getting ready to move into the participants, but before we move on, is there anything you else want to say to the participants audience before we open it up to the people to ask questions and make comments?
I don't think there's anything I want to say. I don't know. I think I'm just kind of eager to hear what people have to say or any questions that they have. So I think we can move on to that.
Good. Well, folks, at this note, I kick into the role of the moderator, a facilitator. So I'm going to leave it up to folks here to raise questions. You can use the chat. You can say directly, only whatever. Let's go forward. So we're opening it up. Comments, reactions to the book, or some of the comments that we just made. Questions, you name it. But keep it brief now.
Mm-hmm.
You got to be kidding. I know we got some big talkers on this set here. And we also Facebook Live. I can't see the Facebook Live, so someone may have to relay if there's a question come through there, Andili, for someone who has a comment or something through Facebook.
Hi, can I say something?
Sure.
Hello, Kgothatha.
Hello.
I loved your book, your stories. It was almost like I was right there alongside with you. You know, I even saw myself in some of the characters. But I'm just interested to know how your book has been received, especially in Botswana. And I'm particularly talking about sales. Did you make any money?
Oh, that is so funny. I don't know because I don't know how it's been received in terms of sales or otherwise because I actually don't have social media, and so it's like really difficult for me to keep track of like what people are saying and things like that. But like, am I making money? I wasn't expecting to make money from book sales. The way that it works is that you get paid, like your publisher, like I'll make my money from the payment that I get from my publisher, right, who bought the rights to publish the book. And so I'm not expecting to make any money from like actual book sales, you know. So you know, like my publisher paid me a sum of money to buy the book and to publish it, and then whatever money is made from book sales is going to go back to the publisher until I reach until I've, you know, like sold out the amount of money that they've paid me. And notoriously, short stories don't make money at all. So it will take years and years and years and years for me for the book to make like its money. So I'm just like not unless like I win like a major prize and then everybody wants to read it at the same time. But generally I'm just like I'm not, you know, like that's why a lot of writers actually end up teaching or like doing other jobs, because it's a way to not focus so much on the book sales. It's just like, okay, I got paid to you know, to finish the book and to have it published, and then, you know, like you have to make your money in other ways.
Laura, did you want to
Thank
make
you.
your comment directly to the guest, to Oni? I see you have written something in the chat. I didn't know if you want to come on and say anything. I could read it, but I thought it's a wonderful comment. We talked a bit about it earlier. I don't see her on the Zoom here. She says, I love that there is not a glossary, and that way it's she said, oh, go ahead. Yes.
Oh, no, I'm working at home today, so apologies. It's not the most professional background, but you
Oh,
know,
no problem.
I wanted to, I really love that. I've seen that in other literature as well, you know, where authors kind of purposefully make sure that they don't have a glossary. And some of them will talk a lot about how much publishers will push back on that. So I guess I was curious, was there much publisher pushback, or are we at a time where publishers are finally accepting that and not pushing that back on that?
My experience was that there was no pushback from my publisher at all. And another thing is this like glossary, then there's also the italicizing of words that are not in English. And so I was very much like, I'm not italicizing and I'm not providing a glossary. And my publisher was fine with it. I think we're at a point now where it's sort of considered normal and ordinary that that we're not going to italicize, we're not going to provide a glossary. So I didn't have any sort of pushback from my publisher. Yeah.
No, that's really beautiful. Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions, other comments, other feedback, other reactions? See, I got lots of questions, but this part's for the participants to talk. One thing hit me, and I said it kind of a little bit earlier when I was talking previously to you, there's a couple of scenes in there that are a little bit R-rated for high school. And my question is, could people read this book in high school, in college, or whatever? What's your expectation? Maybe in some African literature book, they might use this. So did you have an audience in mind when you was writing it in terms of the academic community, or whether it be secondary or elementary school, not elementary, but secondary or post-secondary school?
To be honest, I wasn't really thinking about the audience in terms of I was sort of thinking about, I wasn't thinking about audience in terms of age. I knew that it wasn't obviously like a children's book. But I wasn't, I feel like it could be taught in university, at a university
High school?
level.
What about high school?
You know what? I've actually had, I've had somebody reach out to me from a university here in the US, but who was working with a high school in Botswana, and they read one of the stories. So I think that there are some stories that can be taught in high school. Not all of them, obviously, because some of them do have like scenes, but it's a part of life. It's a part of life.
Behavior lyrics. Okay.
I think somebody has raised their hand.
Okay, go, your hands up. Okay, go ahead. Yes.
Good evening, everyone.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I must say, before I read your book, I hated short stories because they always left me with a sense of longing. It's like they reel you in, and just when you're fully invested, it's like, oh no, thank you for coming, So but with your book, I realized that it was a journey, and I had this sense of fulfillment after each and every story. So in as much as there were short stories, they were very much complete, as independent of each other as they were. And you really had a good way, like an amazing way of just wrapping them up and being like, okay, this is what I'm communicating through this story. And I didn't have, I was at the edge of my seat, and at the end of the book, I was completely satisfied with the way that the story ended, even if there was a bit of a cliffhanger in some of the stories. So thank you so much. I'm fully converted. I think I'm going to enjoy short stories from now on.
Thank you for saying that. I love short stories, actually. I think short stories are such a great form. I would consider even though I'm working on a novel now, I would consider myself a short story writer. And I think that generally people have that sort of same attitude about short stories, like, oh, it's so short, I don't really get to know a character, I don't really know, it doesn't sort of immerse me into a world. But I think the best short stories do immerse you in a world, like they allow you to get to know a character. And I think one of the things that I love about the short story is that it appears to be small, it appears to be covering, it can do, it can feel really expansive, even though you might be covering a shorter moment of a character's life. It can still be expansive and can still have like depth and substance, and just like allow you like a really deep view into a character's life. For me, short stories are really magical. I love them. Thank you for saying that. So I'm glad that you're converted.
Norman, I see you got your hand up. Go ahead. I can't hear you. Okay, good.
Yes. Um, I worked in a library in Botswana, actually a couple back in the 1970s, a long time ago. And I was just curious, have there been any issues for censorship in the libraries? Or have there been any questions of whether or not a library would be allowed to check out your book to anybody? Just curious.
I don't. I haven't had any issues. I haven't heard
Okay,
anything
okay,
from
just curious.
libraries, but that's an interesting question. I actually,
It probably would happen in America, but I was just curious about Botswana.
oh yeah, because now there's like a whole thing about book banning in the US.
Yeah.
No, I haven't heard anything from Botswana. I don't even know if it's in the library in Botswana, to be honest with you. I don't know. Thank you for the question though.
Sure.
Other feedback, other reactions. Only I was going. Something just hit me. I'm into Tiongo. I can pronounce the East African writer who was real famous with Devils on the Cross, Rivers Cross. So he has a number of books that were fascinating. And I noticed at one point he said he would stop writing in English. He would only write in his native language. And my question, and I noticed that even as I'm following some of the Botswanas on social media, they speak oftentimes in Setswana versus English, and some interact. Is there this tendency to communicate exclusively in Setswana? Or are you also wrestling with that whole duality of language? Because Botswana has official languages, and I know Setswana is one of them, English is another one. But again, you got different audiences, and some of them may not understand it. But how do you wrestle with writing a book? Could you have written this book in Setswana and then had it translated, or vice versa? Give us a little more background on that.
Yeah, oh my God, that's such a difficult question.
Oh,
I think,
difficult. Good. I appreciate it. Say that again. I like when I say difficult questions. Go ahead.
well, I mean, it's difficult. I mean, I think that the issue of language is like really interesting in places like Botswana. Because of the position of English in the in our, you know, like the way that we think of English, or the way that our perception of English as a language and what it provides for you. Because, you know, we sort of think of it, you know, it's like it is an official language, and it's a language of business. It's also a language of I don't know, like upward mobility, like sophistication, or, you know, like it's a language, it's like a classed language. We all have to learn English in school, right? As we you know, like as a Motswana student, you learn English in school, and at some point English becomes the language of instruction, right? But there's a way that if you are fluent, if you speak English with a certain accent, then it says something about you, and it says something about your social class and all of those things. But would I have written this book in English, Setswana? I probably not, because I think that when I was learning how to write, or like reading a lot and teaching myself how to write when I was younger, I was reading a lot of English, you know, books written in English. And so my early attempts to write have all been in English, to write prose, to write have all been in English. And I actually think that I don't know if in Botswana there would be an audience for a Setswana language book. I think maybe there is, but I just know that even like some years ago there was a Setswana language newspaper that was like received with a lot of excitement, but it then sort of kind of petered out, because I don't know if people can actually read Setswana with the same proficiency that they can English. I think like a certain generation can read Setswana with can read Setswana, but then there's an age at which we cannot read Setswana anymore like that well. And you know, now we're at a generation that doesn't speak Setswana that well. So it's just like a sad sort of progression where there might be a loss of language. But no, I don't think I've ever written prose in Setswana. I've written, you know, like plays, like dialogue, lines of dialogue in Setswana, because it's easier, because you're just like transcribing what people are saying. But in terms of prose, no, it's, yeah.
You know, as you say, it reminds me of the South African guy who was real famous on YouTube, where he's a parliamentarian. He's talking about. So when people start speaking out of their nose a certain way, people kind of make fun of you, like you think you're better than us, or you're speaking this kind of Queen's English, like you elite. And so we laughed so hard when we saw that for the first time. But you got to be careful how you speak to folks. And there's also a couple of commentaries in South Africa who get attacked for speaking a certain way, even though they went to English medium schools.
Yes.
And so there's that whole conflict between class in Botswana and
Yeah.
South Africa, and the different places where there are sometimes who actually don't want their kids to speak the indigenous language. So again, that can be a very volatile conversation for some people. Even in the United States, there are some Spanish-speaking people who grew up here, and their both parents speak Spanish, but they don't teach their kids Spanish. So again, it becomes, they see it as a hindrance to them, I guess, but I'm not quite sure how to make sense of that the division or whatever, because you would think the more languages you speak, the better off you would be. But yeah, that is an issue. But yeah, it was interesting you say there's a way you say it. Stop it.
Yes, exactly.
Other questions, other comments, other feedback, other reactions. I see some folks here who surprised they're quiet. They're never not quiet when they come on this show. By the way, you say you go back and forth to Botswana. How often you get back to the motherland or get to the so how often do you go back, would you say, on the average? Like, is it every 2 years, every 3 years, once a month? I mean, how often do you travel? Would you
I
say?
would say probably once a year. Like I'm going back in June.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the reason I ask that is there's sometimes when I meet Africans who are living in the United States or in Europe or see them somewhere, and I'll say, well, when you going home? Because if you stay too long, you'll forget your language or you'll forget the custom and yada, yada, yada. And Frantz Fanon speaks about that in one of his books where they're going back to Martinique and the father had to do something to remind him that he was originally from that country versus from France. So again, sometimes we get too far removed from our culture. We forget our roots wherever we come from. So just wanted to kind of throw it out. Other feedback, other reactions. Yes, yes. Yes.
Okay, I was just wondering about the distribution of your book.
Mhm.
You know, when people are trying to get into the game, you know, especially I think people in Botswana, I'm asking for people like us in Botswana. Do you know how wide your book has been distributed other than in Botswana at all?
Well,
And do you think,
sorry.
and I was just going to say, do you think it is possible for people from Botswana, a relatively unknown country, to kind of get the kind of international exposure through their works? I think pretty much the same way that I'm sure you are.
Okay, so the first question is about distribution. How widely has it been distributed other than Botswana? So I have two publishers, right? Or my book has been published by 2 publishers right now. I have a US publisher, which is distributing the book mostly in the US, or I should say in North America. And then I have a UK publisher, which is distributing the book throughout the UK and then the Commonwealth is what they say. So you should so I mean, ideally it should be available in like Botswana, in South Africa, in like other African countries. But again, it comes down to, and I mean, I can't really speak about this because I'm not an expert on how it works. I just sort of have a faint idea. It comes down to how much is the publisher willing to spend and how much do they think they're going to make out of the book, right? And so if I was, say, a very big name writer like Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie or whatever, or like J.K. Rowling or whoever, they would publish like many copies of my book because they would be sure that they were going to make the money back. But since I'm a debut writer who's writing short stories set in Botswana, again, a country that's like not that well known, And it's also like short stories about just like ordinary women living in the village, like nothing, no like pyrotechnics, right? There's a certain expectation that they have about how much the book is going to sell. And therefore, like, how much are they willing to market it, and how much are they willing to spend on the marketing and the distribution and all of those things. And so that also informs like how available the book is and how much people know about the book. Like, what are they willing to, how much are they willing to spend to market the book, right? And so because I'm a small writer from a small place, they're not willing to like go crazy the way that they would for a book that they know is guaranteed to be like a bestseller. So technically my book should be available in like the Commonwealth, but I don't know if it is. I know that it was available in Botswana, but like my sister tells me all the time that people are saying your book is not there in exclusive books. And I'm just like, I don't tell them to, tell them to ask exclusive books to order some more copies. Like, I don't know what they want me to do about it. Like, I can't really do, like, it's out of my hands, So yeah, so there are ways in which it could be available, but it's also like constrained by the demands of the market and just like business sort of ideas that are above my head. And then in terms of like, can somebody make it who is from Botswana? I think so. I don't think that I think so. I think that it will really depend on your work and how much your work is like meeting the zeitgeist, like what is in the cultural zeitgeist at that time, like what are people interested in, like I think that if you were to write a book about Botswana vampires and it was good, maybe you would sell like 1 million copies. You know what I mean? Like it's so difficult to predict what will actually make a name for somebody. And personally, I'm not really like interested in the like the names or the like the fame and the lights and all of those things. I'm very much interested in like my interest is in really just like writing stories. Like that's all I want. I'm interested in writing stories, and I'm interested in reading stories, and I'm interested in talking about stories. And like for me, my goal was like I want to publish a book, and I didn't really care beyond the publication of the book. And so I published a book, and it's like people are reading it, and it's interesting, and like, and I talk to people from all over the world, and I about the book, and some people like it, some people don't like it, but it's like outside of the parameters that I've set for myself. For me, I'm like, I want to write a book about these women in Botswana, and about their lives, and that's what I set out to do, and that's what I'm doing. Beyond that, it's like it's cool to make a lot of money from selling books, but it's also like you can't control any of that stuff.
Oh no, we got about 3 more questions. We only got about 10 minutes left. I don't know if we can get through a couple of them before we get off. Some person asked here who's on, they asked this question, Facebook asked, what advice would you give to a person who wants to be an aspiring writer, a person like me? So what would you give to someone who this is their first time doing it?
I think that I feel like the normal advice is to like read a lot, write a lot. I think that if you are an aspiring writer, you probably already know that. So my advice would probably be just like getting comfortable with like doing a lot of revision of your work, and like just being satisfied with the idea of like how much work it takes to write a story and make it as like to the best of your parts, your abilities, right? To be like, it's not gonna be good the first time around. The first version of it is not gonna be good. The second version is probably not gonna be good. The third version is going to be better, but not good, probably. Like probably the 7th draft is the best one. Like an 8th draft could be better, but it could also now like undo everything you've done. So I would say like really get comfortable with the idea of revision, and just like reading a lot and reading widely. Yeah, I think that in terms of publishing, I still think like sending stories to different publications and just like seeing like reading different publications and seeing what they want, like what kind of work they publish, and then like trying to send your work to those different journals. What I mean when I say publications, like journals. I think that in one good one in Botswana, in Southern Africa, is like the Johannesburg Review of Books, often publishes like short stories. And so if this person is in Botswana, I don't know if they're in Botswana, but that I think that's a good journal to try out for.
A quick question is, and most people may not know this. When you write short stories, do those publications give you an honorarium or a little fee for that, or you do that for free just to get into the market?
Some don't pay you, some pay you. It depends, because also the publications, the journals also, some journals have money, some journals don't have money.
Okay.
Some journals are just like small journals that have been run by like two friends, but other journals are like the New Yorker. So it'll also depend how much they give you, depending on the sort of prestige and how long they've been, the tradition of the journal. Yeah, but
Good.
sometimes it's paid, yeah.
In the chat, I know there's a couple of comments. Someone says, I love your vividly captured scenes and the characters and activities which mirror perfectly the culture of Botswana, and you painted a clear picture. And that's one of the reasons I asked one of those questions is, how quick was this to describe that? In other words, some of your graphic, I want to call it narrative, or your expository writing, where you give the details of the different trees and different things like that. So I noticed you did that a lot in your book. So you almost feel like you're there from reading it. So one person made that comment. The other one person said, I love how intentional you were in telling stories set in the rudimental Tswana household. It is a story worth telling, and I'm glad you took that route and knocked it out of the ballpark. So again, storytelling is very powerful in all cultures, but particularly more in Botswana, the way you described that. Any reactions to those two comments?
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much for all of your comments. I do think that it's important for us as Botswana to write stories. I think what we really need is to have, like a multiplicity of voices. I do think that there's a lot of Botswana who are interested in writing. I've seen this. And I know that, people are interested in writing, but they just don't know like how to start, or like once they've written, like where to take the work. I think that the organizations in Botswana that can help you with that, I'm not going to mention the Writers Association of Botswana because I don't even know if it exists anymore, but I know that the other groups that are working with like beginning writers, like recently I had to judge a contest actually, and it was really interesting reading those stories, judge a contest in Botswana, and it was interesting reading those stories and sort of seeing what people were interested in, what kind of ideas they were interested in, and the range of stories was really wide. The range of interest was really wide. So yeah, I guess I'm just saying, like, we should be writing our stories, like more and more stories from Botswana.
I would be remiss before we got off the air or this set or this event not to talk about race in terms of white folks, Makoas, Lakoas. They used to sometimes call me Munsu Lakoa, means black white man or something like that, because I spoke in English when I was there. But the question in your novel, and as you write, you don't spend a lot of time in that area. And I also have to explain to people, being an African American in Botswana and being in the majority is like dying and going to heaven, particularly if you grew up in apartheid America or the United States. So how do you navigate, or do you navigate race? And do you come in contact with white folks or Makoas or Lakoas in Botswana? I notice you don't have a lot there in the novel or anything, or in your short stories, but do you intend to ever talk more about that group? Oh, last point is that at one point, the first president of Botswana was married to a British woman who was white. And so again, that may have set some of the tone of how the country is multiracial. But my long-winded question is, how do you address that a little bit? Do you?
An interesting question. I mean, I feel like I don't really address race as such, because I don't think it's like a big question in Botswana. I think about colonialism though, and I think about the effects of colonialism and how the effects of colonialism still sort of with us today, and how we're dealing with the post-colonial world, living in the post-colonial world. I don't know. I mean, I think that sometimes you do come face to face with racism in Botswana, but it's in such minor sort of individual ways where, you know, like maybe I'm at a, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if I have an answer for this. I think that it does exist, but it exists on such a small level that I don't have to think about. It's interesting because, you know, when I'm in Botswana, I don't really think about race. When I'm here, I have to think about race. When I'm in the US, I have to think about race all the time. And it's, you know, when I'm here, I feel like I have to be very vigilant about how I'm interacting with people and how people are interacting with me. And when I'm in Botswana, even though I might, you know, come into contact with other white people, I don't really think I don't have like that desire to be like vigilant, or like I don't feel like it's necessary for me to be vigilant in that way, because I don't know. It doesn't affect me that much. I
Oh,
don't
one
think.
question you alluded to earlier. Can you tell the difference between a Motswana who's going to an English medium school versus those who's going
Oh, for
to
sure.
Botswana? Well,
Yes.
give me a little nuance how they behave or act. I mean, do they have that kind of, are they
Oh,
just regular people, or how are they when they do that? And do you see that class difference or those socialization roles playing out in how we operate as Africans?
I think that there is a different. I think that you can tell. I think that one way to tell is like who speaks English the most, right? Also, like what kind of
Wait,
accent
hold
do
it,
they
hold it, hold it. Are you saying they talking English all the time? They're never speaking
all
to
the
They
time?
don't even know how to
Yeah.
do Madi, say, look, I
They
can
can they can greet you in Setswana and all of that, but they like the conversation is all in English. But it's also like about the accent. But I think now what's interesting too is like who lives in Gaborone. Like I think that people that live in Gaborone, even if they go to public schools, they now also have like this sort of same mannerisms, so like the accents of the people that go to private schools. It's really interesting to me. Like for me, it's like really fascinating those sort of differences. But yeah, you can tell.
You can tell them. Well, the thing that somebody shared with me is that you can tell people who grew up in villages and who know how to cook in a big three-legged pot, and when there's a wedding or a funeral, they know how to help out. Versus those bourgeois who come from the city, they come out there and they're afraid of flies and you name it. They act like they don't even know how to do anything because they've never busted a grape working in the Masimos or the fields, and they've never gone to the cattle post, yada yada yada. So again, there's a whole
When I
issue.
was when I was in undergrad, there was this whole thing about, you know, like the first semester of university, a lot of people are coming to Gaborone for the first time to go to university. So like they're really coming from the village and coming from like various parts of the country. And so there was always like a big thing about like who has serious rural background vibes about them, right? And it's
Right.
about the clothes, it's about the hair, and it's about the way they carry themselves. You know, like you can tell, like I don't know, just like the appearance, like clothes. And so people, like as soon as because you know we get allowances from the government as students, people as soon as they get that allowance, like they set about just like Gaboronifying themselves, being like, okay, now I'm gonna buy a wig, now I'm gonna buy this, and I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna dress better, I'm gonna, you know, because now I have the money to, I have the money to now buy, you know, clothes that from Mr. Price, or you know, I don't know, it's fascinating.
We're down to our last minute, and I just want to give you a chance. Any closing comments before we close out, only?
I think it's crazy. I've just been talking people having serious rural backgrounds. But no, I just wanted to say thank you so much for the invitation, and thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to talk to your organization, and to talk to people that showed up for the Zoom and for the Facebook Live. Yeah, I'm really, you know, I'm really always honored that people are reading my book, because I never really thought. Sometimes I get really surprised when people tell me that they're reading it. I'm like, oh my God, how do you have that? Because I kind of forget that it's out there in bookshops. But yeah, I'm really honored that people are reading my work, and I'm honored that you invited me to come here and talk to you. Yeah, that's it.
Well, I really appreciate you on for being on today. It's been a pleasure, and as more movement on off of race equity, we really like to bring more people to the forefront and use our medium to lift them up and again communicate about the issues of reconciliation, reparations, and the things of healing and dealing with historical trauma. So these book and literature and so on can help us to bridge those gaps and, as we say, bring those worlds together. So we hope you've enjoyed us today in this conversation, and we hope you will join us in the future. And we always end. May the force be with you. Baroko.